All right, everyone. It is noon, and I hear sirens in the background of somebody's video. So that's always a good reminder here in Oklahoma what time it is. So welcome to our Nature Connects Us webinar series. We're very delighted to have you with us. Folks are rolling in now. I am absolutely starving. So to buy us a little time while people roll in, I want to hear from you what you either had for breakfast or lunch. Tell me, I want to know. So chat it in and tell me. Larissa was just eating a piece of peanut butter with jam, and I've salivated over it, virtually seeing it through the screen. And then Mike was just eating a piece of string cheese. So I'm a little envious of their snack parties that they're having over there. What are you having, or what are y'all having? Anybody have anything tasty? And you can always use the chat function down at the bottom. Text me, tell me. I want to know what you're eating or what you've had today. This will buy us a little bit of time. Make me jealous. Oh, scrambled eggs and toast, says Eloise. Yum. Sarah hasn't had anything to eat. She's hungry too. So let's all make Katie and Sarah really jealous about the foods that you've had today. Sorry, Sarah, I totally understand. Luckily, this webinar is not about food, but if anybody else is eating anything tasty, or you had something tasty for breakfast, text us in. Oh, ham and cheese omelet and sausage berry. Man, that's killer. That sounds delicious. Oh, I could totally use a ham and cheese omelet and some sausage. That sounds great. So we're just waiting a few moments here. Looks like we've got 21 folks joining us so far. And just take another moment here to let folks just kind of trickle in. It's a beautiful day outside. It's like we've got quite the crew on here. Seeing some familiar names, some new names, which is fun too. Oh, Jeannie had eggs over easy. I do love me some eggs over easy, Jeannie. And applewood smoked bacon and cantaloupe. Well, now that's a new combo. That sounds really tasty. Very nice. Way to go, Jeannie. Applewood smoked bacon. Yum. I like eggs over easy because I like to mop up the yolk with whatever I'm eating, whether it's the bacon or the English muffin. That egg yolk is always yum, the best. Oh, killer banana bread, says Stephanie. What? A little jealous of that one, Stephanie. That sounds good. You beat us to the fall season. Are you feeling fallish, Stephanie? You trying to get your fall on a little early? All right, looks like we are 3 minutes after. And yes, she's feeling the fall season. She's ready for it. And also looks like we've got about 19, 20, 21, 22 folks that have joined us now. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Really excited about today's presentation. Our state director, Mike Fuhr, is joining us, and he's going to join us to talk to us today about a new and expanded program that the Nature Conservancy recently launched this summer. And it's about wind siting, the proper development of siting renewable energy, and how can we do it better? And so Mike is going to talk to us about the challenges and about the opportunities and how this program is benefiting nature and our wild and iconic landscapes. So just a quick update on how we manage these webinars. Mike will present for about 15 to 20 minutes, and we will have a slideshow going through it, of course. And then once he completes, we will open this up to a question and answer session from you all. And you have two ways to submit your questions. You can do so at the bottom. There is a Q&A button. You may type your question in there. Just click it and type it in. Or you can find the chat function, and that will allow you to type in your question as well. Sometimes the chat button is buried underneath the More button. So if you see a More button, click it, and you should see chat appear. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. So Mike, it's all you.
Thank you, Katie, and welcome everyone. Appreciate you joining to learn a little bit more about the Nature Conservancy's wind siting efforts. What's really interesting about this project is that the Oklahoma chapter really kicked this program off with our counterparts in Kansas, and this thing has grown into something much, much larger than just Oklahoma and Kansas. And it's because it's a real collaborative approach to working with the renewable energy industry. And so I'm really excited to share this with all of you. Katie, go ahead and go to the next one. Yeah, thanks. So when we're thinking about the challenge of making a shift to a more balanced energy economy, we're estimating that we need another 2,000 gigawatts of renewable energy, and that is a lot of energy. And when you start to think about what the footprint would be, and the footprint of an energy project really is just based on, how much land is impacted, and every type of energy has some type of a footprint. There is no energy type that does not. And the reality is they're all very different. And wind energy in particular has a very large footprint based on the amount of energy it can produce. And so when you start to think about that and this amount of energy, we can impact something the size of the state of Arizona or larger. And so we need to be thinking about, how do we minimize impacts from this renewable energy build out? Because we need to basically increase the amount of energy from renewable energy by 10 times. And because it impacts so much land, it'll impact a lot of all of us and our communities. At the same time, because we want to make this shift as quickly as possible, we have to think about the reality of these conflicts are going to slow down that renewable energy deployment, and we don't want that to happen. So why do we even have a strategy? Well, I touched on this a little bit, but we support the rapid expansion of renewable energy, and that's wind and solar, because we want to, again, make that shift in our energy economy towards more renewable energy. Because they do have a larger footprint, we want to make sure that we do it right. The other thing is, we're expecting, as more and more wind and solar projects hit the ground, we're anticipating that we're going to see many more conflicts, because the really easy, simple sites to develop are disappearing faster. And that means the more difficult sites will start to be developed, and that means potentially more conflicts. And this is all based around what we call the mitigation hierarchy. And the mitigation hierarchy basically says, for any energy that we develop, we first want to avoid sensitive areas, just not build in those areas. If that's not possible, we should then try and minimize those impacts. And last, and this should be really the last place we go, is we should try and mitigate for any impacts that we have when we build in those areas. So this whole site win right approach is based around just keeping it simple and avoiding sensitive areas to begin with. It makes everybody's lives a lot easier. Just a visual here to show some of the infrastructure and scale that we see with these renewable energy projects. They're big, they're industrial scale. They can generate, yes, a lot of energy, but they have a large footprint. And we can't forget about things like the roads that are necessary on the landscape to connect these, as well as provide access for maintenance. Well, how big are these things? Well, this slide kind of puts it all in perspective. Wind turbines started pretty small, and relative to, and I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but there's a small pickup truck and a traditional windmill. That's what we used to see on the landscape, and those were basically a way to use wind power to pump water to water livestock, for instance. But the things that we're dealing with now are big, and they've gotten bigger over the last 10 years, to the point where we're talking towers that are upwards of 400 feet tall. There's also a 747 on top of one of the wind towers in this slide, just to show how big these things are. In addition, the tips of those blades rotate at upwards of 180 miles per hour. They may look slow to us when they're moving, but the tips are moving really quickly. So this is a big deal, because if you notice in the photo on the right, the landscape prior to those turbines being there, it was completely devoid of tall structures. And those tall structures can impact how animals that evolved on a wide open prairie, how they react and how they behave. And that's what we're seeing. So it's not just the direct impacts. So there are collisions with birds and bats, and that is really important. But we also have these behavioral responses that we're concerned about. Lesser prairie chicken is a great example. Here's what we call a prairie obligate. It is required that it live on the wide open prairie to survive. That's where it evolved, that's where it lives. And there's research, which is summarized here, that shows any structure, improved roads, all the way up to wind turbines, causes them to have these responses where they avoid those areas. And for wind turbines, they will not nest within a mile of one of those wind turbines. So even if it looks like really good quality prairie habitat underneath that wind turbine, they won't use it. So the area with the 1 mile radius around one of those wind turbines translates to about 2,000 acres that is no longer usable for species like lesser prairie chicken. So we have to be really thoughtful about where we put these things. Make sure we avoid some of those intact prairies, because we don't have a lot of intact prairies left. Temperate grasslands, as we call them, are the least protected, most converted habitat type on the planet. And our tall grass prairie, which we're very familiar with here in Oklahoma, is the epitome of that. There's less than 4% of that left. So we have to do what we can. One of the things we are doing is developing science. We have a whole bunch of publications and web pages designed to share the science and make sure that as many people know about this as possible, particularly in the wind industry and utility company arena. It's important to have the best science out there, especially as a science-based organization. So this is what our strategy looks like. We are looking at, and this is not just in Oklahoma, again, this is a much larger scale effort, but we're looking at policies and incentives, ways that we can accelerate low impact renewable energy. We want to, as I just pointed out in the last slide, develop and advance the science of low impact siting so we can do this as well as possible. And what I'm going to talk about today is this third bullet. We want to provide wind developers and other off-takers or power purchasers one-stop shopping. Where is that best science available, and how can we interpret that to make it that much easier for them to develop this low impact renewable energy approach that we want to see? So this is what we call the wind belt. It includes 17 states. We chose this boundary because this is where roughly 80+% of our future wind development is going to occur. And that's because those orange and purple areas, those are the windiest parts of the United States. And in order to generate electricity, of course, you need wind. And so developers are going to look first at the windiest places in order to capture that wind and generate the most electricity. So we chose what we're calling the wind belt to expand the strategy that we developed in Oklahoma and Kansas that we called Site Wind Right. Well, what does that science look like? Let's go to the next slide. So we compiled more than 100 different data layers related to the ecology of all of these states. Data like I showed for the lesser prairie chicken. Where are those intact habitats? Where do whooping cranes tend to stop over during their migrations? Waterfowl, bat roosts, and really large caves. Over 100 data layers. And this is what it looks like when we throw it on a map. These are the areas that we think are really sensitive and are likely most impacted by any wind development. We also wanted to look at the engineering constraints because we didn't want to do an analysis that said, hey, there's all of this land available for wind development and not take into account that there are some places that developers just can't go. Places such as special use airspace that the military requires to be open for training. Municipalities oftentimes have rules or laws in place that restrict building, wind development within a mile of a school. We obviously can't build on top of an existing wind facility. We took all of these engineering constraints and put them on the map as well. Then we combined it with the last map that you saw so we could kind of crop those out. This is all done in an effort to showcase and help us determine if our approach, if Site Wind Right is a viable approach. If we did this analysis and we said, hey, there's room for one more wind farm, it's not very viable. It's not going to go anywhere. We're being too restrictive and it's just simply not going to work. But what does that result look like? Well, that's in the next slide. Bottom line is, these are all of the areas on the landscape that we identified as having potential for low impact development. This green area, these are the places we want developers to go. It'll do all those things I talked about earlier, hopefully make the process to get it in place much more streamlined. There'll be less controversy because, as we know, any bad PR for a project means there's an increased chance that that project won't get built. We've seen that here in Oklahoma. And what's really exciting is when we did the analysis to determine whether or not this is a viable approach, we determined that there's more than 1,000 gigawatts of additional capacity just in these 17 states. 1,000 gigawatts, you know, let me put that in perspective for you. That's equivalent to about what we produce in the United States right now from all sources: wind, solar, hydro, nuclear, gas, and coal. So there is plenty of room out there to meet our goals of developing more renewable energy, but do it in a way that's not going to impact all of those iconic landscapes and species that we've been working on for decades and decades. In other words, we can have our cake and eat it too. And overall, like I just demonstrated, the message is very, very positive. We can do this. And there's no reason that we can't develop all the renewable energy we need, while at the same time impacting all of those important places. We can have our cake and eat it too. So the vision now, as we're calling it, is clean and green. So clean energy, but truly green in terms of impacts on the landscape. And this is what we're promoting and how we're talking about this. And this effort goes beyond just the developers. We're working with all of those companies that are purchasing renewable energy power. I'm sure you've seen some of the commercials where Amazon's talking about how they're going to try and go 100% renewable for all their facilities. They're actually taking a very bold approach, and they're going to acquire some of their own renewable energy. That means even sometimes developing their own projects. So they need to know about this as well. So utility companies, any company trying to meet the goals of their sustainability plans need to know how to do this right. And again, the one-stop shopping for doing that is with SiteWind Right. We're already working with quite a few Fortune 500 companies, and it's really exciting because it's starting to take hold. Oftentimes, sustainability plans have goals associated with renewable energy, like I talked about, but they're also wanting to protect habitat, so they can actually check 2 or 3 of their sustainability goals by using and incorporating SiteWind Right into how they procure renewable energy. So what does it look like if we're successful? Well, instead of about half or less of the projects we see being developed in sensitive areas, we're going to see hopefully a shift to many, many more projects being developed in those low risk areas. 80+% is what we're hoping for. And that means that we'll protect a whole bunch more of those landscapes from development that doesn't need to happen there. Like I said earlier, there's a way for us to do this in the right way and still meet all of our renewable energy goals. In some places, there's actual pretty complicated approval processes. And by using a tool like SiteWind Right in their planning, can actually potentially make their projects approval go that much faster. And so it's very exciting that we can make this transition and do it in a very conservation-minded way. And lastly, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this, taking a deeper dive into all of the science and all the data layers, if you're interested, you can go to nature.org/SiteWindRight. There's even a link there where you can go to a mapping tool and zoom in and zoom out and just take a closer look at what all those data areas look like and what the low risk wind areas look like on the landscape. So I guess I'll stop right there and see what kind of questions that you all have for me.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Mike, for sharing all this exciting, the details about this exciting project. So we are taking questions now for Mike in regards to this project. If you could please type them into the chat function and or into the Q&A function. So both of those are down at the bottom of your screen. There should be some icons available. Type us your questions and we'll let Mike see if we can't stump Mike. Just kidding. So we'll have Mike give us responses to those. So in the meantime, I am just curious, Mike, if you could tell us, What is the reason for, in one of those slides you showed the turbines, how over time they've grown so much larger. So what's the reasoning for that? Does it yield more energy? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, the technology is advancing, and so bigger blades means you can capture more wind at lower wind speeds. So it's a way to be more efficient with each tower, and we do want to see that. We want to see each tower produce as much electricity as possible, and I anticipate that that will continue to change over time, and that's a good thing.
Barry is asking, who are some of the wind developers that are utilizing this tool now? And I'll expand upon that as well, Mike. And I would say maybe even other companies such as purchasers. So who are some of the entities that are utilizing this tool now?
Yeah, it's a long list, fortunately. So companies like Nextera, they've incorporated it. Companies not in the wind space include Pepsi, Salesforce, having conversations with Google. There's a lot of conversations going on right now because people are really interested in doing it the right way.
Super. Okay, so we've got a great question here. This is one of our former OCLA participants. I'm never going to get her name right. She always tells me in person. I'm so sorry. Davin is asking, when the wind farm sites are retired, how are they reclaimed? Are all the artifacts of the turbines removed, or do they only reclaim, or do they only reclaim to 36 inches, leaving large amounts of unreclaimed materials?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that's evolving because we're getting to that point now where we're seeing older projects, some of the very first projects that were developed, hitting their lifespan. And so we're seeing a couple of things. Sometimes the entire towers are taken down. Sometimes just the generator and blades on the top are removed and then replaced with more efficient blades and generators. But the reality is, I think the industry is really trying to figure out what they're going to do with all of those materials. And that's a really important question. So how do we deal with that waste, and how do we develop these things in the future so they last even longer, so that we aren't having to put these things in landfills? I did read something about a company that was shredding those up and recycling them somehow, but I don't recall what they were using those for. So I think there are some really creative and clever people out there trying to address this, Devon. So I think there will be more to come on that. I'm starting to see a lot more newspaper stories about that.
Great, thank you, Mike. We've got a question from Jeannie Shannon. She says, what is the footprint of solar? Considering that solar can be located on top of present infrastructure, do we want to promote solar more than wind? And also, can you talk about the sound issues around the wind turbines?
Yeah, so I'll start with the solar stuff. Solar does have a smaller energy footprint, and that is a good thing. And we're starting to see much more solar development, even in states like Oklahoma, whereas 10 years ago, you looked at the solar intensity maps. I think a lot of people would have guessed that solar wasn't coming to a state like Oklahoma, but in fact, it already is. And our utility company partners are saying it's coming and you need to be prepared. And by prepared, they mean, can you develop something like SiteWind Right for solar? And that is something that we're actually already working on right now. Interestingly, I mentioned we put like 100 different data layers together for this wind energy project for SiteWind Right. Not all of those data layers apply for wind. So these are much lower structures, but what other types of impacts might they have? And one of the issues I've heard brought up is from the air. One of those solar projects might look like a water body to some migrating ducks. And so are they going to have some issues trying to land on it, or something along those lines? So we're going to need to dive into those kind of questions. And we're doing that with some solar developers. And some of those same companies that are developing wind are developing solar. So we already have a really good in with them. In addition to that, there's not as much science surrounding solar impacts. And when I'm talking about solar, I'm talking about the photovoltaic cells, the ones that you see on somebody's house or on that little solar recharging pack that you can buy for your phone. Those are the ones that are very different than some of those concentrated light solar projects that were built in the past. So it is something we're hoping to launch perhaps early next year. Huge demand. We want to meet that. We want to have that tool available, have that one-stop shopping for solar projects. And probably the best news is when we developed SiteWind Right, we felt like we were about 10 or 12 years behind the curve because wind took off much faster than anybody anticipated. Solar is just taking off now, so we can get in on the front end and develop some partnerships that allow us to do a much better job siting solar and developing that site solar right, if that's what we call it, and at the same time developing the science with those companies. So a pretty exciting time. As far as the sound goes, I don't know too much about the sound issues. I have heard that brought up, and it may have a lot to do with proximity to those wind turbines. And I think the flash effect and the sound effect does have an impact on certain wildlife behavior. So it's probably a part of the overall impacts from those really tall structures.
Super. Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate the in-depth description there. Dorothy is inquiring what infrastructure, such as transmission lines, et cetera, is required and what regulations are required for those?
Great question. And the infrastructure, the transmission lines are really going to be the limiting factor for a lot of future development. Whenever a company is looking at a site to develop, one of the first things they're doing is looking for proximity to a transmission line, because if they're not able to tap into a transmission line, then they have nowhere to put their electricity and the project is dead in the water. So they need to look at how close that is because it costs money to build transmission lines. So closer is better. They also need to be looking at whether or not there's any capacity on those transmission lines. And I think this is going to be probably one of the biggest struggles that we have in the United States is upgrading our transmission system to accommodate renewable energy because it produces electricity much, much differently than the coal and natural gas fired power plants that we've been used to. You can turn those on, turn those off as the need goes, but that doesn't work necessarily with wind and solar. So in addition to upgrading that transmission grid, I think storage, when that becomes available at the right scale, is also going to play into that. So there are a lot of question marks out there still. And I know that's something that the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, is thinking about. We also developed a project called Power of Place that is looking at that. It was started in California, used a lot of the very same data as SiteWind Right, but they're looking at how the future is going to look in terms of the entire thing, from developing the solar and wind all the way through to the demand, through to what the transmission needs to look like. So if you search online for Nature Conservancy Power of Place, you can read a little bit more about that. And the good news is that project is about to be expanded to cover the entire United States. So we're going to have some real good insight for the Great Plains, where we are on a separate grid from that Western grid that California is on. So it'll help us do some long-term planning to address those concerns that you're raising.
All right, super. Great question. Thank you all. Ruth Richards is curious, Mike. How do you store the energy that's generated? What's the efficiency of this kind of energy, and how far is it transported, and does it lessen the farther it goes?
Hi, Ruth. Thanks for that question. So really good questions. Interestingly, a lot of the energy produced right here in, say, Oklahoma can be shipped as far away as New Jersey. So there's a lot of energy trading and lots of pretty complicated stuff going on when it comes to knowing exactly where the renewable energy goes. So it's something that I think is actually quite complicated. And the Power of Place project that I just mentioned to you is starting to look at how we're much more efficient with where the renewable energy goes, because for alternating current, which is how we get our electricity, those really big transmission towers that you see on the landscape, those are all alternating current, or AC, and they are less efficient with transporting renewable energy over long distances. So I think being in close proximity to where the load is or where the energy is needed for these projects and where that electricity is going to go is something that we need to take into consideration. There have been a couple of projects on the books, and I don't know that any have been constructed yet, where they were looking at developing direct current lines, high voltage DC, and that means that we're using a different type of current, like comes out of a 9-volt battery. It's much more efficient, and they were actually looking at taking the produced renewable energy directly to those places where the need is. And one of the projects that was proposed and did not come to fruition was going to go from Western Oklahoma and the Panhandle all the way to Memphis, where it would be dumped into the Tennessee Valley Authority power system. And that's where the demand is. There's much more demand out there because they don't have the potential for solar. They don't have the potential for wind. So anyway, it is really complicated, and it gets more complicated the farther we dive into it.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Ruth. Susan Stowe has a question for you, Mike. She's both her and Ruth, of course, are docents at Tallgrass. So Susan is asking, she noticed an article today that stated that painting at least one blade a dark color reduced the danger to birds. Does this have any truth or value?
That is a brand new study. I have not read the study yet, but it suggested that they could reduce bird collisions by as much as 70%. And if that's the case, that is a really big development. It still leaves 30% mortality, which is pretty high. So it's important to remember that that is a great way for us to reduce or to reduce some of those direct mortalities. But we still have other concerns related to the behavioral response, the impact to habitats, and bats. We don't know if bats are going to see that color on just one turbine, and I would guess that they don't. Mortalities to tree roosting bats are enormous, and because they reproduce so slowly, there's a lot of concerns about what kind of population level impacts we can have. Is this going to be something, a lot of wind development in a certain area, is that going to crush a population to the point where they might become endangered? So even with really nice advances like that, we still want to focus on the avoidance. Stay away from those really important habitat areas and building those low impact areas so that we're starting off on the right foot.
Right. Super. Thank you for those questions, ladies. Betty, also one of our Tallgrass docents. Hi, Betty. She has a question for you, and that is the footprint of wind energy impact nearly the size of Arizona? Question. So that was on one of your slides in the beginning, and I actually noticed, Mike, that it was a pterodactyl icon. Maybe you can explain that as well. But she's asking, it's nearly the size of Arizona. Is this all wind energy throughout the lower 48 states? Do you want me to pull that slide back up? Or?
No, that's okay. That is definitely for the lower 48 states. So the wind energy that we need developed in the lower 48, will impact an area the size of Arizona, cumulatively speaking. That does not include the potential for offshore wind energy. And as you can imagine, offshore wind energy development could potentially have a totally different set of impacts. So bird collisions, those kind of issues are certainly still there, especially if it's built over a part of the ocean where there are certain migrations, although perhaps some migrations will be at a much higher altitude. But what kind of impacts are we going to see for fish migrations, mammals, marine mammal migrations like whales, and those are areas that some of our coastal states are looking at, and we want to develop a very similar tool for offshore wind energy too.
All right, fabulous. All right, we have a question here from Rosalie. She's asking, are the turbines susceptible to destructive winds such as tornadoes?
Certainly they are, but there are things that the companies tend to do when those heavy duty storms are coming in. Those blades can actually rotate to capture the wind more efficiently. And if they're like this, then the wind is not going to be captured on the wind blade. So when they're anticipating really heavy winds, they'll actually turn those blades and lock them so they can't rotate in order to survive those heavy storms. So that's something they've taken into consideration. That doesn't mean they're completely immune. Certainly, just like our homes and other infrastructure can be damaged by things like tornadoes.
Okay. Well, I don't see any more questions here, but that was quite the range of questions. Mike, you handled them all very well. We weren't able to stump you. We tried. So
Well, you did stump me on the pterodactyl icon. I don't know why that was there. I can't explain that one. Maybe they would have been impacted by wind development. I don't know.
I'm not sure either, but did anyone else notice that? It looked, maybe it wasn't a pterodactyl, but it certainly looks like one, which I got a little chuckle out of. So
I'll double check and see.
maybe it's supposed to be a whooping crane. I don't know.
Yeah. A
So
pelican.
I'm sorry.
A pelican, yeah.
Yeah, could have been a pelican. All right, so everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Before we part right quick, just a quick reminder, if this is something you are interested in taking action on or learning more about, you can, excuse me, hang on, let me fix my share screen here. Small technical malfunction. All right, you can take action or you can learn more by going to nature.org/site wind right. And if you would like to take action, one thing you might think about doing is contacting your local utility company and inquiring about their best management practices. How do they avoid sensitive wildlife and landscapes? Another option, if your company whom you work for or someone that you know, if they purchase wind energy, this tool may be something they want to consider incorporating into their RFP process and into their planning. Same for developers. So if you know of any folks in the industry, feel free to share this with them, provide them with our contact information. We'd always love to meet and share more and help collaborate on ways to reduce the impact to our sensitive wildlife and landscapes. Until then, we do have another Nature Connects Us webinar coming up, and that will be on Wednesday, September 23rd. This is a new style of a webinar we're going to do. We are bringing in a third party. Her name is Trish Morris, and she is with Ideal Homes, who is a residential developer here in Oklahoma. She is working with her company to implement nature in their neighborhoods, which is pretty exciting. So we are going to talk with Trish at noon on Wednesday, September 23rd. Hope that you can join us for that session. And if you can, please visit nature.org/OK webinars to register. And we look forward to seeing you then. Until then, we hope that you all have a wonderful day and enjoy the beautiful weather. Thanks again, Mike.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.